Imaginaries, a space for us to share feminist imaginaries for collective liberation. And we are excited to be here. Briefly, our first edition, we talked about the role of art in our liberation struggle. And one of the key questions that came up at that conversation is, what do we do when our oppressors chant the chorus of our liberation song? And that question has just haunted us for the last few months, and we are hoping to be haunted by even more profound questions from today's conversation, so that we can stay in that headspace that allows us to consistently seek, critical consciousness in a world that is increasingly doing the things that it was created to do. Just a quick welcome to everyone. We love that you are here. We love to be in community with you. What is Liberation Alliance Africa? Liberation Alliance Africa is a feminist collective where we do decolonial feminist organizing, knowledge production. We do questions around what policies are and how they fit into our lives. And we also do work that documents the liberation of this continent, that documents the feminist liberation of this continent. We do work that builds, world building work. If I may just say quickly, can you please mute yourselves? So we prefer this format. We don't like to do the webinar format where everybody's behind the wall. We would love you to have all, access and all of that, but it would be beautiful if you could mute your microphone when you are not speaking. That would be amazing. And when you are ready to, share with us your reflections, we can turn those on and carry along. So yeah, Liberation Alliance is co-dreamed by myself, Omolara Oriye, and Oluwatobi Loba Ayodele. And we love doing this work. We love being in community. We love asking critical questions. We love even interrogating our own politics and the ways that we show up in this world. And just to realize that we are showing up in the way that engenders liberation, in a way that can give birth to the decolonial futures that we dream of. And so we welcome you once again. I will not bore you with too much grammar. It would be nice for us to jump into today's conversation. Before we continue, yes, I can see people in the chat. Absolutely, please introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us your name, where you're joining us from. Tell us what you would like to reimagine. What would you like to speak new things about? You can check out our website, check us out on social media. If you are feeling interested as well, please share your work with us. Share links, share, website addresses. Show us where we can see your work. Show us where we can, be in community with you outside of this space. That would be beautiful as well. Today, we have a few people in the room who will be holding the space for us in terms of steering the conversations. We are honored, absolutely honored, to have Wumpini Mohammed, to have Ololade Fani, to have Irene Mendwa. These are women that I have admired for so long, and it's just beautiful to be here with you. Thank you, Wumpini, because I know that your schedule has been very tight. We love you. We appreciate you coming here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We thank everyone for joining us. And before we start today's conversation that is focused on digital colonialism and Afro-feminist futures, I would love to read a quote that we have on our Instagram page currently, which is something that I would like all of us to think about, right? So we have on here, a key consideration in the exploration of digitalization and digital colonialism is a question of people, the planet, and capitalism's exploitative nature. Whose land is exploited as a never-ending spare part yard to keep Western nations replenished? These are kind of some of the questions that you will encounter in this conversation today. And we hope that we are able to share reflections in ways that move us forward toward our liberated futures. So thank you again for joining, everybody. before I hand us over to the moderator for the day, I would just quickly read her bio and just, let us know who we've got in the room, and then we will hand over. Can you mute yourself, Dr. T? Thank you. No apologies required. Thank you so much for joining. We love that you are here. Beautiful. So I am very, very pleased to hand over today's conversation to our moderator, Ololade Faniyi. One of my first experiences of Ololade was actually on Twitter, where, I just saw, I'm like, yeah, who is this critical thinker saying the things that make me happy? And somehow the universe brought us together and we are in community with one another. And so I would just speak a little bit about Ololade, and I will hand the conversation over to her so that she can take us, on this journey today as we reflect together on digital colonialism and Afro-feminist futures, exposing questions on the people, the planet, and the ideas of mental coloniality that Sylvia Tamale describes as a situation where our thoughts and desires are determined by the hegemony, and how do we break away from that reality? Ololade Faniyi is an African feminist activist scholar, my favorite kind of scholars, and PhD student in women's gender and sexuality studies at Emory University. Her graduate research reimagines the relationship between technology and African feminist thought at intersections of surveillance regimes, platform governance, and digital colonialism. She is a sub-editor on gender and feminisms at The Republic, an African regional advisor for Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, and a graduate researcher for the Atlanta Interdisciplinary Artificial Intelligence Network. Ololade, we are honored to have you with us. And please take over the reins for today's conversation. We are here to support and, share our opinions and thoughts in the chats. I can see that we have the chats coming up. Probably at the end of the day, we would be able to share more about ourselves if that comes up. So thank you, Ololade, and the floor is yours.
Hi, Amola. Thank you so much for organizing this. I've been a fan of Liberation Alliance for so long. Can you all hear me properly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I've been a fan of Liberation Alliance for so long, and I basically kind of bullied you into into having me join one of these teachings. So I'm really excited. I'm so glad to be in conversation with Dr. Wumpini Mohammed and with Irene. And I'm really excited to meet you. And I'm sure we're going to have a good conversation, a good long conversation today. So today's teaching is on digital colonialism and Afro-feminist digital futures. And I wanted us to begin by considering how digital technologies shape our everyday lives, from our intimate, relationships with our phones to the platforms we navigate. There's someone who is not muted. Is it possible for you to mute everybody? I think as admin, you have okay. So from the phones we use, the platforms we navigate, I want us to consider how digital technologies specifically reproduce and intensify gendered patterns of colonial exploitation that African feminist scholars have long critiqued. From the psychological trauma inflicted on women's bodies in content moderation sweatshops, to the algorithmic suppression of feminist and queer thought, to the gendered implications of mining lithium, as well as surveillance technologies. Across these scales, we begin to unpack how digital colonialism operates through multiple modes of extraction and control that affect African lives with even more gendered implications for women. And these technologies work in opposition with autonomy, with social transformation, and they have created new forms of bodily exploitation that have disrupted our communal care networks, how we even imagine ourselves and our political agencies. And I want us to also begin by considering how sexual violence in Congo has become a weapon of mineral control for digital progress. The very fact that we're able to be on our phones today, on our laptops, on our iPads. I want us to consider how the demands of platform labor and the gig economy echoes colonial patterns of devaluing women's work, while women must face isolating psychological strain. I want us to consider how surveillance systems have disproportionately monitor women's bodies and movements, particularly targeting feminist organizers. We saw this in the case of the Feminist Coalition in Nigeria, where they would move from one location to the other, and the next morning, the Department of State Services is right in front of their door. And we also saw with the expose with this platform, GST, where they talked about how politicians have begin to use surveillance to keep tabs on their mistresses and their wives. And with the scale of digital violence affecting African women's lives, from sexual violence to environmental disruptions to psychological trauma to organizing disruptions to surveillance, we need exactly the kind of holistic analysis that African feminism affords us. So Philomena Chioma's study in 1981, while defining African feminism, says it's a humanistic feminism that is deeply rooted in historical experiences of African societies, including the transatlantic slave trade, colonization, and continued economic pressures. And she also argues that this critical thought that emerges, African feminist thought, is a product of the polarizations and conflicts that represent some of the worst and chronic forms of human sufferings. And now in this moment, we begin to see how worst and chronic forms of human sufferings are taking on new digital forms. And as we begin to see how in the digital age that we are in, how digital colonialism is mapping onto historic oppressions, I'd especially like us today to focus on the human and the environmental cost of digital progress, from the mining labor to the content moderation and data labeling. And lastly, I'd like us to delve, and I say delve particularly because of the whole drama with delve about how delve was ChatGPT language. And I've been very persistent about looking through things I read now and finding delve used so commonly by Africans, you know. And so lastly, delve into the algorithmic colonization of the African imaginary and what Omulara had pointed us to earlier about mental colonization. And my entry into this work is always, if West African women's bodies or African women's bodies generally was the script upon which the subhumanness and labor was read from the 15th century, then it is in the bodies of Afro-descended women that we can find liberation, because there's nobody that can speak in the words of the Kombi River Collective. There's nobody that can speak about our experiences or speak about our freedoms in the way that we do. And yeah, so I wanted us to also walk through the definition of digital colonialism that Abeba Bayani affords us. Abeba Bayani is an Ethiopian computer scientist and AI accountability expert, and she calls digital colonialism a corporate agenda that is driven by the rhetoric of state-of-the-art algorithms, bridging the digital divide, and AI solutions to, you know, social problems. And there's an historical playbook that big tech is following now that if you kind of map it, it's the same logic of colonization and slavery and extraction. It's extract, exploit, exterminate. And so I wanted us to segue into discussing the human cost of AI by focusing on the bodies and labor and digital extraction. So by centering the BBC African Eye investigation that came out last year, and in it there was an interview with a person who worked as a content moderator for the middle contracting company Sama. And we found out that Sama was employed by Facebook and OpenAI. And these content moderators were exposed to graphic violence, self-harm, child exploitation, bestiality. They were paid $2 per hour for this extremely traumatic work. And we found out that OpenAI and Meta had actually paid Sama $12 per hour for each worker. But Sama says they're only worth $2 per hour, they're Africans. And they worked 12-hour shifts in this high-pressure environment. There was inadequate mental health support. I was recently speaking to Kauna Mowgli. Kauna Mowgli is one of the content moderators, and she chairs the Nigerian chapter of the African Content Moderators Union. And there's so much trauma. When you listen to her, there's so much trauma. And there was a recent expose that is gaining grounds all over Twitter right now on this platform called 60 Minutes. And they're talking about the PTSD from constant exposure to violent content. They're talking about the exploitation of Kenyan workers. They're talking about how these workers were forced to sign NDAs for 25 years, silencing their experiences. And these NDAs are basically premised on forced labor, on silencing and control. And in the clip, especially Nerima Wako Ojiwa calls it's like modern day slavery. So I wanted to open the floor to our speakers now to reflect. I have an overarching question, but you can take it in whatever direction you want to speak about. I wanted us to reflect on how African bodies have become sites of digital labor, how modern technological progress relies on the perpetration of African bodies as laboring bodies. I wanted us to talk about the racial capitalism that is at play here, that disrupts women's lives, the psychological and physical cost of modernity. And yeah, I just wanted us to, whatever direction you like to take that. Opening up the floor. Wumpini, do you want to? Okay, my bad. That is my bad. So I was supposed to, read your bios and introduce you. That is my bad. I am so sorry. Yeah, it's 8 o'clock, so I'm just gonna blame that. Okay, 1 second, please. Amala, I can't seem to find the email you had sent me, actually.
All right, that's okay. I'm happy to quickly share. Have you seen it?
Please. No,
okay,
no, I can't seem to find it.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Please take a look. I shared a drive with you just now.
Okay. I can't seem to find. Would you go on to read the bios, please?
All right, absolutely.
To find it. Okay, thank you.
I'm happy to quickly do that. Dr. Wumpini Fatima Mohammed, she, her, is a Ghanaian feminist activist scholar and an assistant professor at the Department of Communication at Cornell University. She is the co-editor of the book, African Women in Digital Spaces, Redefining Social Movements on the Continent and in the Diaspora. This book was published in 2023. She currently serves on the editorial board of Feminist Media Studies and the Communication Culture and Critique Journal, and serves as a board member of the West African Research Association. Her research, which focuses on feminisms, decolonization, and media, have appeared in various scholarly journals, and she has worked as a journalist in Ghana for several years, and some of her work has been published on Al Jazeera, The Washington Post, and OK Africa. That is Dr. Wumpini Mohammed. You're welcome once again. And then I have my friend Irene Mwendwa, who took great care of me the last time I was in Nairobi. Irene is the executive director at Policy. Before that, she was Policy's strategic initiatives and feminist movement building with experience in human rights and tech policy. She's an experienced partnership professional with extensive experience with innovative collaborations across public, private, and civil society sectors. Irene structures and executes projects that deliver better policies and legal frameworks on public policy issues such as elections and technology. And that is Irene. Over to you, Ololade. And sorry about the troubles.
Yeah.
We're good.
Oh, no. Yeah. I could have sworn it came in and I can't find it anymore. I'm so sorry for that, Dr. Wumpini and Irene.
But please make sure your devices are properly connected.
But yes, I'm going to repeat the question so that you can just to remind you. And for everybody, I'm sure from their bios, you can see that we're going to have like a wealth of experience here today. And so I wanted to invite us to talk about how African bodies have become sites of digital labor, and how our modern technological progress relies on the perpetration of African bodies, especially African women's bodies as laboring bodies. So whatever direction you like to take that, please feel free to go. Dr. Wumpide, would you like to start?
Good afternoon from Tamale. I'm happy to be here today. Also, I just want to give a warning that, we're talking about digital labor and all of that, and I'm currently in Tamale, so I'm praying that the digital gods allow me to be able to be on this call till we end. So I'm just, putting out this warning because, it can be, I had issues when I was on a faculty call on Monday. Thank you so much. This is great. I'm happy to be here. I want to start by taking us back in history when we talk about, of course, when we talk about our colonialisms, we have to sort of connect them to how they manifested globally. So a lot of the times when we are online and having conversations about oppression, we are always saying that all oppressions are connected. And the reason why we keep saying this is because of the globality of colonization and imperialism, and how those have manifested variously across various communities in the global South, and also, of course, in the global South within the global North. So I want to start by talking about the politics of resource extraction and what that means within the conversation around digital labor and gender and all of that. So before we even go into talking about digitization and digitalization around labor, we first of all have to think about colonialism within the African context, and also think about the notion of slavery. So the extraction of resources within the continent of Africa has always been colonial. So the extraction of human resources via slavery, the extraction of material resources via colonialism, and even in our post-colonial condition, the extraction again of human resources through brain drains, and also raw material such as cocoa and other minerals and materials to be processed within the global North. So I sort of give this foundation because I feel like we cannot talk about digital colonization and digital labor without looking at what precedes digital, or like the digital space. And a lot of the times when we talk about the digital space, people often like to think that it's new. Sure, it's a new, technology, because when we even discuss new media in our classes and in our research, we are thinking about digital spaces as new and the novelty effect of digital spaces. But as we think about digital spaces, it's important for us to understand that these digital spaces are constructed by humans and are also really impacted by the social, political, economic conditions of wherever they find, wherever we find ourselves using these spaces. And so I like to think about, digital extraction and draw a parallel between that and also the extraction of human resources or natural resources, such as mining, for example. Take Ghana, for example, mining, and what that has, like the impact that has on our environment, on our communities, and also on our health. And also within the same conversation around extraction, I want to think about academic knowledge extraction and the coloniality that is embedded in that. So when we talk about academic knowledge extraction, very often we think about how we go in, parachute into a community, say in Tamale, Ghana, and collect data and then take it to the USA and write a paper on it. And of course, that is academic knowledge extraction, but we can also see that those extractive practices also happening intranationally within the nation state, where Ghanaian academics can also go into a community, extract knowledge or data, and then leave. And so I bring this notion of extraction because it helps us see the ways in which digital labor and labor in general often get depersonalized. Like the human part of it is sort of taking away from the equation when we're talking about labor. And so I talk about this so that we begin to think about the human implications of exploitative labor practices, whether it has to do with resource extraction, human resource extraction, or even knowledge extraction. So digital data extraction therefore mirrors these colonial logics that I just outlined, in the sense that Africa sort of becomes a testing ground and also becomes a dumping ground of issues that have to do with this digital data extraction. I mean, there are so many examples that we can think about. And of course, the people who are most affected are often the marginalized people in these communities. And when we even talk about digital, Africa becoming a digital dumping or testing ground, we can go beyond even the digital to look at the routes through which we experience the digital, right? So computers and mobile phones and what gets imported onto the continent, so take that as an example and compare it to the secondhand clothing menace that we have here in Ghana. We do have an electronic menace here too that we have to deal with, which of course can directly be connected to digital production and digital labor practices.
Irene, please feel free to take the floor.
Thank you so much, and it's such an honor to be here. I love listening to Dr. Wimpini. Thank you, Lara. Thank you, Liberation Alliance, for inviting me. And I lead an organization called Policy, and we are an Afro-Feminist civic organization. This means that we believe, we look at, and we are dreaming that technologies serve all publics. And in this regard, it of course takes the form of, or the guise of, looking at data ownership, as I have put in the chat. I've heard a lot about colonialisms and how they all intersect in their own way. We may have thought for a while that we are not experiencing some of the colonialisms, but we all know, especially in the advent of technologies, in the wave of high and fast uptake of technologies in the health sector, agriculture sector, and now mental health sector. Hey, you all have Headspace, you all have your note-taking, your journal apps. That's a very big business right there. And you're always feeding it your information and journaling and saying, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling happy. And they use that information one way or another to design the next thing that you'll have to buy. So that's a form of, give or take, colonialism, because one, when you feed your data or feed the information voluntarily, it serves another group or it serves another entity first before it serves you immediately. What do I mean by this? They're able to package your information together with millions of us who've already fed some of those tools and package it, use it to learn what are the behaviors, what are the patterns, and what are the issues arising in this environment. Please, do you mind muting? Saba? Thank you. So what do I mean by this? I mean that Policy has been able to look at what it really means to own your data through a format of digital kinship. Digital kinship, in very simple words, is where, just like we lead in our families, just like we exist in our communities, we believe that I have a grandmother, I have a mother, I have a parent, and they're all part of my community. Should I have any wins, any troubles, any crises, I'm able to relay some of this information with them and they're able to support me because I'm part of a kinship, I'm part of a family, I'm part of a community. So digital kinship in this regard means giving the people or the publics with which you're using their information, their data, the same autonomy, the same authority to also dictate some of the tools that they would want to continue using and those that do not serve them or are causing more harms. But the model that we have currently on especially tech ownership is one, very West, two, and when I say very West, it's literally very West. It's the west part of our our globe with which most companies are registered and ideas are created out of. And two, these and most of these companies do not have intra-governmental standards guiding them on what to release, what to, leave out before releasing it to the public. And that's why you can now use one of the most cutting edge technologies that is in use, especially for internet penetration, is Starlink. Let's not talk about the owner here, but think about it. It revolutionized internet access and internet availability to very many communities who we would traditionally think that it would take a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a lot of effort to have internet access to them. This means satellite technology being considered as a way to connect communities who would have not who would have not been connected in the next near future. So these are some of the things we are thinking about. And policy has always said the answers to some of the crises we want to solve, especially when it comes to tech harms that have unfolded, are within us as individuals and more so as African women, because we've always believed African women have been at the forefront of leading, ideating, and creating innovation and technologies. But because of poor documentation and because of course, the power dynamics and resourcing, then women's efforts in many cases are erased or eroded. Women's names are not well attributed in some of those innovations. And in other areas, which is some of the developments we are trying to advance, gender data, which looks at power dynamics about ownership of ideas, creation of ideas, sharing of resources, has not been taken up well by our governments, our institutions, our hospitals, our academia to really say that, you know what, the reason why we are saying this year we really need more women than men in our computer science classes is because we are really churning out fewer women. And we are making a deliberate effort, not because of inequity or advancing inequity, but we must make a deliberate effort to really ensure that women and girls are taking up STEM courses. So gender data is one of the solutions with which we've also come about as an institution to say can be used to advance digital kinship or ownership and data ownership that feels like us and looks like us. I just wanted to use an example, if you'd allow me, Dr. Ololade. Look at the glass in front of you. I know all of us may have a glass or a cup or a plate. These are very neutral objects. They don't have, don't have any political inclination, but they're tools with which you use in your day-to-day to drink your water, to drink your tea, to eat your food off of a plate. Think of data the same way. Data is very, very relevant in our day-to-day lives. And if it's not managed well on our behalf, it can really favor a select few. As we've already heard from Dr. Unpini, digital colonialism really is not really about technology domination, but about the extraction and exploitation of data, cultural narratives within our continent, particularly, and economic opportunities, as Olalade had started, with how data workers, labelers, annotators are being treated in Kenya, in Ghana, in North Africa and South Africa as well. But this form of new imperialism, just to close this example of the glass, needs to consider that because we're giving out our information, we also need, again, to have some power and control of some of these tools that continue collecting our information. And this is the digital infrastructures we're using. Think about African countries. None of them produce any final product when it comes to tech tools. Think of your mobile phone, your laptop that you're using, your mouse. Most of you prefer to use a mouse. It seems very simplistic, but can you believe it? Only less than 5 African countries can assemble a mouse. We always have to rely and pick some of this from other continents. So in regard to the glass ownership or owning your cutlery and your plate, it's really about, if you own it, you're able to control and you're able to decide how it's used and displayed, so that, even if you've signed your waiver about your data and your photographs, you're not seeing them being used years later to still show that, you know, Africa is still poor, or Africa, they still suffer from very many diseases. There are also other things, even when that could be a truth. Then sharing with permission, would you, you know, if I'm drinking off of my glass right now, would you just come and pick the glass and go and create another glass just because you want to create? You would ask me for permission first and explain, we really need to create another glass, Irene. We need you either to finish the water so we can go and advance and make other glasses off of your glass. But the models we have right now, you know, even when they say they are seeking our permission or we've granted them permission, they already have gone ahead and exploited our tools, our data and information without our permission. Of course, misuse and exploitation. When you have something as beautiful as a drinking glass, you take care of it, you don't misuse it, you don't toss it around, and you don't exploit it to, you know, a level with which even when guests come to your house, they look at your glasses and say, oh, they look dirty or they look misused. Same case, you know, just because you have information about Africa doesn't mean you thrive off of the worst bits of the continent or of some of the individuals, because as you're aware right now, most of us call this poverty porn, you know, very, just to be upbeat and for people to relate with this. This really shows them that our data in reports, you know, whether by the World Bank or some intergovernmental organizations, has been really used to bring out just the difficulty, the issues that Africa has without even addressing the light or the wonderful things that we have, like Liberation Alliance and policy is doing. Of course, when you have our data, when it comes again to data ownership, you need to maintain and care for it. And of course, the last bit, which I'll speak on more as I know there are more questions on community benefits without loss of ownership. I can still own this glass and ensure that Dr. Wumpini, Dr. Ololade, Lara, and all my friends use it well, enjoy it, and they're able to drink water off of it, but I can still own the glass in a very beautiful way. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was just a wealth of knowledge. I was making notes and I wanted to spotlight some of the highlights from your talk. By the way, I am a doctor in training. But yeah, I'm accepting that. Speaking to the universe. So so I really appreciated how Dr. Wumpini pulled us back to how extraction occurs across multiple skills, and especially academic knowledge extraction. And I just thought that was so profound, because a lot of the times we're working in this neoliberal academies, and because we African scholars, we justify the imperative of an academy that extracts, that uses people as object lessons and just, you know, dumps them without giving back to the community that, you know, built our work. And yeah, and how the Africa has become a testing ground and dumping ground, and how that connects to also you know, the second-hand menace and even the clothing waste and so on and so forth. And I especially loved how Irene draws our attention towards how even our most personal journals are training data for AI systems. And I feel like a lot of people, there was this book I recently read called Data Colonialism, the new colonialism of big tech. And they said, there was this line that stood out to me, and it said, their most highly sought product is our lives. Like, they want your life, they want to know everything that happens, you know. And we're talking about how even the condition of our modernity right now, it tells you have to adapt. If you don't adapt, you're going to be left behind. And so everybody is getting this type of technology, this type of phone, this type of iPad. Or if you don't get it, you're going to be left behind. How will you do this? How will you do that? You know, for security, you have to get a Ring camera. Ring camera has been connected to the surveillance of the army or something. I can't remember exactly, but it was when I learned about it like a year ago and I've forgotten. And it was really disturbing. You know, you have to get a Ring camera. Oh, you're two, you can't do this. You can get a robot to sweep your floors. But like, before it sweeps your floors, it maps your house. And so like everything we do, it's like we're just feeding these people our lives, like take more, take more, take more. And it just becomes a, I mean, there are benefits to technology. Technology affords us this community we have. I mean, there are people who I've met, like friends all over Africa, that I would not have met them if not for the affordance of Twitter. You know, Twitter has created communities, it has created spaces where we commune. So yes, there are affordances of technology, but like Omolara said at the beginning, oppressors are beginning to use the same language we use. And so they will say, oh, we are bridging the digital divide. We are trying to connect. And the bridging, the saviorism is coming with like an underline of several folds and layers of oppressions. So thank you so much for that. And I saw in the chat someone mentioned that we have to dwell on Congo, and which is right next. That's the next section we're moving into in this conversation. And I wanted to invite the our speakers to talk about the material foundations of our modernity and our digital progress. So Congo's minerals has enabled technology development, and the DRC especially becomes this example of how the pursuit of technology advancement has created this intersection of violence against women's bodies, against their communities, and against their environment. So what are the facts? Cobalt is used for lithium-ion batteries, and coltan also is used for capacitors in several processing units, especially for AI. And copper is used for wiring and electrical components. Now, Congo has 70% of the world's coltan, and it has also 60% of the world's cobalt. And this was staggering. Congo's wealth, mineral wealth, is estimated to be $24 trillion. And the disturbing aspect of it as well is that, surprisingly, Rwanda is the top coltan exporter through its exploitation of Congo. And so I wanted us to I recently read an article by this writer, and she's the co-founder of What's Happening in Congo. Her name was Ruth Mudingai. I hope I didn't butcher that name. And our organization especially works on announcing the atrocities that occurs in DRC. And some of the connections I was able to find, even though she was focusing specifically on gendered violence, but I was trying to extend how that gender violence speaks to digital colonialism as well. Our companies like Apple and Dell and Microsoft benefit from the exploitation of Congo, the real cost behind our smartphones and digital infrastructure. We begin to see the statistics emerging out of Congo that 43 women and girls are raped every hour. In fact, some people have called Congo the rape capital of the world. We see how sexual violence, how displacement, how water pollution and deforestation are a weapon of mineral control, all towards technological progress. And there's displacement of 5.8 million people in eastern provinces, destruction of traditional communal structures. Women who are primary stewards of the environment, are facing intersecting violence. And there is a sort of impossibility of speaking up for Congo, because it seems like regardless of the death, of the poverty, of the illness and displacement of Congolese people, it's okay as long as we are becoming technologically advanced. And I think the one lens through which I could, because I was thinking through Congo before this morning when I woke up, and I was like, that is necropolitics. I feel like that Achilles Mbembe did something when he coined that concept of necropolitics, how it becomes a way of subjugating life to the power of death, and how there are several populations who are subjected to living conditions that confer upon them the status of the living dead, all for the technological advancement of the world. So I wanted to invite our speakers to talk, to reflect on this in whatever way you'd like the conversation to go, how our digital future is built on violence in Congo. And what must we do? What can be done? Should we do the other way around, Irene and then Dr. Wimpini, or do we want to stick to like our usual order?
Wimpini, you can go.
Wow. Yes. So I feel like the question that you just asked connects right back to the issue that I talked about earlier, the relationship between slavery and colonization and how that connects to digital colonialism. So I feel like one of the reasons, because, right now there are various genocides taking place globally, and one of the reasons why we are not seeing of course, Africans are speaking about DRC, but on the global scale, we are not seeing as much attention on DRC. And of course, some people have connected it to the notion of empathy fatigue when it comes to Africa, where Africa is sort of seen as the continent of poverty and wars and plunder and all of that. And I'm glad that we get to talk about that here today, because it's really interesting to see how the media specifically has global North media, Western media specifically has done a great job of silencing conversations or discussions around the resource extraction that is happening in Congo, so that Americans can have the next iPhone, so that people can have, all these technologies that keep getting churned out because we need to satisfy our consumerist desires to have the newest thing every year. And so I feel like as we have these conversations, of course, it's important to make the connections between digital colonization and how gender is constructed within these conversations, digital colonization, and also even how ethnicity and all of these other issues are constructed within these discussions. And as I think about the issue of DRC, I feel like you can directly connect it to other various issues that are happening across the continent as far as digital colonization is concerned. And part of the erasure is about, part of the erasure around digital colonization in the Democratic Republic of Congo is that Africans, for example, are constructed as people who don't have agency, as people who don't have the agency to speak about our perspectives and talk about the issues that are affecting us. And I also want to, make the connection between that and the ways in which, certain communities are specifically not even included in conversations around empathy, in conversations around care, and in conversations around justice. So yeah, one of the things that I also want to talk about is the way that when we talk about digital colonization, specifically within the notion of resource extraction, we don't think about it in the sense of how Africa is located in the global public sphere.
Amen.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes. So how Africa is sort of situated within the global public sphere, but also ironically, looking at the fact that African countries or communities are exploited to support the development or advancements of technologies, we often also are the most marginalized or disenfranchised when it comes to technological access. So for example, even looking at what infrastructures make digital labor possible, Africans are often left out of these conversations or access to these kinds of infrastructure, like thinking about electricity, thinking about like smartphones and computers and what they mean for our access to these spaces. So one of the things that I also want us to think through is how we can utilize African ways of knowing and African ways of being, African feminist approaches to understand the issues that are happening in DRC, and also to understand how to even discuss or construct these issues around DRC. So are we talking about DRC and how resource extraction within that country is affecting the people of that country in dignified ways? What do the representations of these communities look like, especially visually, right? How are the bodies that are specifically affected by these issues framed in the news media space? What images are accompanied or accompany these stories that are being told? Yeah.
So 2024, 2025 are the super election years. And world over, we know any processes that relate to elections or electing or choosing someone to be in charge takes the face, the shape of our bros. I want to avoid the word men. So in this very season, this year and next year, bro culture is very real. And if you think about bro culture, this means there are more new politicians who have entered into the sphere. Some are rich, some are wealthy, some come from the private sector, in fact, most, if not all. And they come with the same values that they upheld in their previous opportunities that they served. And if you think about big tech or in terms of tech accountability, then now more than ever, the focus on Congo, even when we want to put all our efforts, our academic studies or papers on Congo, the focus right now is to see how to increase profits. And the wealthiest folks right now are mostly in the tech sector, if not all, tech and fashion. So the question that I've always asked myself as an individual first is, how would we then make sure that they feel, one, the harms that they're causing to some of these countries in Africa, because it's not just Congo, but of course we understand Congo is facing more adversities. It's also thinking about the data labeling, the annotation that's ongoing in Kenya, the labor, effort, time, sleepless nights that folks, young people who do not have jobs because of poor fiscal policies, because we're in huge debts as a country, relates to then how and why Congo is getting either the center stage or no attention at all. Because at the end of the day, it's about bro culture and bros protecting themselves. Something else that I've been trying to advance in my mind as an individual is, if the bros have a say, is our work as feminists to then write more, document more, or do we need to find new ways of engaging in these conversations that can show them, you know what, these people really mean business and they really are asking or are saying, they deserve a seat at the table, in ways that can expand potential for women, especially in STEM and in tech, to engage better and to engage richly, and in ways that can also advance the same opportunities that startups and the bros, again, the tech bros, continue getting. Because if you look at the resources, the funding opportunities, and the investments made to improve lives, and improving lives now really relates to use of technology, either through health apps, machines being created to work or support in hospitals, in schools, education, technology, and all that. So if you look at the investment made to develop private solutions to be sold, most of the funding, support, and investments is still very much leaning into the bro culture. So ways in which we can really ensure that Congo gets, one, the attention it deserves, and a change, particularly in the fiscal policies and the because this is really tied to economic justice and labor justice, is to ask who is buying the end product and work backwards. And the last thing is for feminists to realize that we can also build our own tools that can show that you don't need to harm communities to create tools. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene, for that, and Dr. Wimpini as well. To your last point, I wanted to spotlight, I was actually going to do this towards the end, but I thought this was a good opportunity to spotlight. So in terms of creating our own tools, there is a new platform that is currently in works now called Pariwo, and it's been developed by Akwake, Emezi, and I forget the name of their collaborator, and they're creating this platform, and the guiding logic of that platform is that I'm going to share it in a bit. The guiding logic of that platform is that if we're in spaces where we can't speak because we are afraid of algorithmic suppression, then we're going to create alternative spaces of communing. And I also wanted to spotlight the feminist AI toolkit that Anne Holland, who is a Zambian feminist, just recently created. And it's basically a toolkit where those who are creating tools, whether technology tools or AI tools, can put in, it has questionnaires, and they say, is your work, does your work acknowledge this? Does your work acknowledge that? And it scores you. Based on your score, you realize whether your work is truly feminist or not. And then this was an example I drew from Abeba Biani's work, where she spotlighted Charity Wuyan. Charity Wuyan is a Kenyan researcher who created this AI tool that helps farmers without internet connection, by the way. It helps them. So they scan their crops and they're able to see, they're able to detect which kind of disease is appearing on the crops. And this is an AI tool that is developed without extraction, without, stealing from communities, but it's giving back to communities. So I just wanted to spotlight that African feminists are doing this recreation. And we're not only critiquing, we're actually recreating and reimagining alternative ways. And I think from what you both had said as well, I was especially drawn to the concept of empathy fatigue for Africa. And I thought that was, I don't even know how to unpack that. But that is just something to think about. Empathy fatigue, wow. And and how you draw us to African ways of knowing. And also bro culture. Oh my God. I feel like bro culture is probably going to be the death of the internet, because there's so much, from the red pill bros to how the broness of Elon Musk's dude bros on Twitter right now. It's just an insane structure. And I think what it's drawing us to is racial capitalism, how racialized forms of exploitation continue to shape labor patterns. And I was thinking about how the very logic of African bodies are the ones who deserve to mine the actual minerals, or are the ones that deserve. So in terms of AI development, for instance, there's a separation of the labor. So the data labeling and the content moderation is considered low value. And so they assign that to Africans. And then the high value analysis and the creation is, assigned to the global north. And so there's this perception of African bodies deserve the worst and the worst of labor because they are subhuman. And this is a lens that has continued from the 15th century downwards. And that's why I think that the question of race is something that African feminists, we need to sit with and unpack how race continues, because there's a lot of focus on colonialism. Yes, but there's a racial basis behind colonialism, and it's that racial basis and that racializing logic that continues to continues to affect how labor patterns and what is considered, low value in terms of Africans and otherwise. And I would like to pivot now to the question of mental colonization. But since we are sitting so much ways and we have found connections between the first part, between data labeling and the actual resource extraction, I wanted to open the floor for those who have any questions at this point. And between me and Dr. Wumpini and Irene, we'll be able to sort that out. So if you have any questions at this point, please feel free to jump in, either in the chat or just turn on your mic. Okay, Gabrielle, yes, please, you can go ahead.
Hello. I really enjoyed this panel so far, and I'm reading Decolonization and Afro-Feminism by Sylvia Tamale. So it's definitely connecting to a lot of that. And so my question was kind of, regarding everything that we've discussed today, is it really possible to use digital platforms, or digital technology in general as a vehicle for liberation for African people, for African women, especially when we don't have the means to production, kind of like we discussed earlier, how even when we're creating our own platforms, we're still having to rely on servers and that are still run by, the multinational corporations that are the source of our issues anyway. So I was just kind of wondering, is there a way to decentralize and decolonize digital technology, or do we just have to be okay with still somewhat using the master's tools to complete our aims?
Gabrielle, one, they built, or they're still building those tools using your information, using your data set. We have to understand the baseline of it all. Even when we hate those tools, I mean, platforms, I could say you own a part of it. So our work, once we use it or we join on some of these platforms, is to remind ourselves that, hey, if I can do something to improve this, let me see where. The model of ownership, I won't even touch on that because our governments have failed us greatly. But the standard, the baseline of it all is that all advancements in technology, particularly technological advancements, are possible because of you as an individual, because you provide your data, you provide your information, sometimes willingly and other times unwillingly. You can see how our continents are protecting their people. The European way to ensure that technology serves them is that they are going as a community. They're not going country by country, individual by individual, market by market, company by company. No, they say we are one. If you enter any EU country, you must meet this threshold when it comes to data. If you're collecting data, you must tell us the purpose. Or if you're giving out your data, you must note that these are the parameters with which you should be giving out your data as an individual, really as a society. So any company or any innovator who's trying to build, who's trying to really engage, in the European Union continent or market, they're faced with, I would say, additional layers of compliance, which improves their tools. Let's be honest. Every time you're asked to comply, you're really improving yourself one way or another to ensure that you're not harming another person. It's expensive in most cases, but the more it's articulated and exercised in, especially in the EU region, and if it's replicated here in Africa, it can then become less expensive. So Africa, the US as a market and the global south, or, other countries, have we reflected on our data governance models? Or in the case of a few African countries, are we just copy pasting the EU way, but not enforcing it in reality? Because one, we lack capacity, or we are trying to understand our capacity to enforce it. Other countries are also we want our people to advance technologically, so we'll either reduce taxes so that they can develop technologies, but at the same time, they're not, some governments are not working with these people. So sometimes it's very difficult to have a success story if you're not working with a government and a lot of people, because you need many people to use your tool or your technology so that it can really peak and be widely used and become good for you to improve it rather. So Gabrielle, it's possible if there is intervention from lots of parties. I'm not saying the EU way is the best model or it's what we should be looking forward to. I was just giving you the case of how they've done it. So what can Africa do? We've been engaging with different governments to understand how they've tried to protect different data issues in Africa. And some say, we are also trying to understand this concept ourselves. And these are public servants. So civil society organizations, civic tech organizations like us have been promoting a lot of capacity building trainings that can help them catch up and ensure that even as other countries are complying, you can also make laws for African countries that can also speak for us and look like us and accommodate our features, our cultures and subcultures. And the best case for this is if you wanted to benefit from owning something like the Masai Shuka, how would you ensure that being credited, the credit for developing the Masai Shuka or the Masai necklaces always comes back to Masai women? That's one of the examples with which we use with public servants to ask them, how are you protecting some of these cultures and communities to ensure that this is celebrated by everyone, but benefiting some of these communities. And we're not saying other communities cannot wear beaded necklaces, they cannot own Maasai shukas, but how can these be attributed back and benefit the Maasai community, for instance? Just as an example, or a simulation to really understand that data should serve everyone, but the governance models and ownership models are where it's at, where we need to really decolonize and look at ways of breaking the bro culture. Thank you.
Yes, Irene, thank you. I just want to add that on paper, many African countries, we do have, on paper, not specifically within the digital space, but in other, for example, spaces such as like legacy media, we have governance structures or policies around media for social good or media for social change. So for example, our public broadcasters, for example, in Ghana, the GBC, their role is to use media for the public. And I also just wanted to add that when we talk about that, it's really important that when we think about the digital futures or digital realities of Africa, that we look to the continent, understand our socio-political and economic reality, rather than look to the West and copy and paste what doesn't necessarily work within the African continent. And I absolutely agree with you on the point that this is our knowledge. These are our resources. Like, extracting cobalt from DRC is literally our thing that they take and then mix it up and then sell back to us. It's like cocoa. They come and they take the cocoa and they take it to Europe and make the chocolate and sell it back. It's our knowledge, like we own it. And I think that it's about time that we really did take ownership of that. So thinking about the digitalization of labor and, for example, how it can mirror colonial logics, where the assumption often is that the political economy of digital work in America is the same as the political economy of, for example, digital work in Africa. I think that is something that we really need to move away from if we are to take a decolonial approach to what knowledge is, what knowledge looks like, and what knowledge creation around digital media looks like. And I'm also interested in us thinking about, for example, our constructions of what constitutes digital work. So a lot of the times when we're talking about digital, again, we often look to the West because, of course, that's where the raw material is processed and brought back to us. So we often look to the West as places, look up to them as a guide toward what we want to do. But if we are taking a decolonial approach to it, again, I want to use a few examples within the African continent context where there are ways in which our, for example, digital economies have advanced that they haven't really advanced in those ways in America. So let's take in West Africa or Ghana what we call Momo, mobile money, and in East Africa what we call M-Pesa. That's an example. So when I teach my students about what digital advancements look like within the continent, and I try to explain M-Pesa or Momo to them, they don't get it because they don't understand how you can send money to someone through their mobile phone number. Like, is it like Venmo? And I'm like, no. Is it Cash App? Is it PayPal? They still don't get it. And I think these structures were constructed to suit the African context. So that's an example of how digital affordances have sort of been utilized to address the needs of Africans within the African context. And when I've also done work in Ghana, a few, on telecom companies. So in Africa, telecom companies own the digital space because they are not just mobile, service providers, but they are also internet service providers. They are just like, they do a lot of other things. So I was doing work in Ghana. One of the things that I found was that, and something that you don't see much in the global north, specifically America, is that there's the culture of corporate social responsibility where corporations are supposed to give back to communities. So one of the things that I found was that there was this telecom company in Ghana, and part of their CSR or corporate social responsibility work was trying to bring healthcare access to women in rural communities. So what they would do would be that if you were like a pregnant woman and you lived in a community where you didn't have immediate access to a clinic, they had like a hotline that you could call toll free to share your symptoms with a nurse on call or a doctor on call, and then they would provide access to you there and then. And that's not something that I see, you know, I mean, in America, they'll probably want to call it telehealth. You can call it telehealth, but within the Ghanaian context, you're not paying for it and you don't have to go through insurance to get access to that because it's the responsibility of these corporations to do that. So, I mean, there are so many examples of how African communities have utilized digital spaces and digital affordances to, you know, support what we need here within the African context. And I also want to quickly talk about what constitutes knowledge. And as we're talking about digital, and I think Irene was talking about, was it some necklace that you mentioned? I forget the name. I think it's a Maasai. Yes, the Maasai necklace that you were talking about. I think that one of the things that we have struggled with as African co-creators of knowledge, as African communities that create knowledge, is sort of navigating this Western notion of knowledge ownership as individualized, whereas in our communities, knowledge is collectively owned. And so even as we talk about digital economies and digital labor and, you know, extraction from our communities, we need to think about whether or not we want to look to African philosophies or African values as far as, you know, of Ubuntu, Bilchinsi, all of these other philosophies, as far as knowledge ownership is concerned, and what copyright looks like, and how knowledge is collectively owned. And I also want to quickly use another example from my own work, where, for example, when we talk about digital colonization, we also have to talk about culture work. So TikTok, Netflix, all of these other platforms where Africans are producing knowledge. So another example is that when COVID hit, and then there was the Ghanaian pallbearer meme where Ghanaian pallbearers would hold, you know, a coffin and dance. And I think they even appropriated it in Brazil to as like a COVID PSA, you know, public service announcement, that if you didn't do the things you were supposed to do, you would be the person in the coffin carried by the Ghanaian pallbearers, right? So when that all of that was happening, and it was interesting, and it was like an internet moment, I noticed around that time that there were Chinese companies that were basically making figurines of these pallbearer memes and selling them. And I would assume, without the consent of the people, you know, these pallbearers who are Ghanaian, without their consent, I'm not sure that they got consent to do that. But that's another way that African knowledges are sort of extracted and appropriated, not just by the global north, but also other global south powers in the work that they do. And I'm thinking recently about, for example, Netflix and what that looks like, and Netflix Niger, and how they purport to come in and tell the stories of Africa. So in our scramble to gain visibility globally through Western platforms like Netflix and all of these other platforms, there is the exploitation of African culture workers, right? So for example, how much is Netflix paying French culture workers versus African culture workers as far as filmmaking and television, or even Korean culture workers as far as making films and making television is concerned? And beyond the exploitative aspect of it, what cultural imperialism is happening on that front? Because you know, in doing that kind of research, one of the things that I found was that in many of the Netflix movies that I watch about Nigeria, when I come home and I'm watching television, watching Nigerian movies with my mother, they are not the same actors. So what is this cultural imperialism of Netflix within Africa doing as far as cultural hegemonies are concerned? First of all, they are amplifying Nigeria over other countries as far as cultural production is concerned, because of the numbers and so many other reasons. And then secondly, when you look at that too, we are thinking about how they are rewriting or restructuring fundamentally the Nigerian film industry, where within the, you know, the movies that you see on New Nollywood or Netflix Niger movies, the themes that are explored are vastly different from the themes that are explored in movies in Nigeria, right? So these are some of the things that we need to think about. How does digital colonization look like as far as rewriting cultural narratives are concerned? How does it look like as far as cultural exploitation is concerned? And also, how does it look like with regards to perpetuating hegemonies, continental and regional hegemonies around culture, and the globalization of African cultures on the continent, of course, and also beyond the continent?
Thank you so much. I was taking notes again that I'm going to spotlight, and I was reflecting on what Irene had said about, to Gabriel's question about decentralizing and decolonizing the master's tools, and your point about it's your data and how technology is only possible because you provide your data. And this kind of reminded me of your concept earlier of digital kinship, and how platforms should, and how the concept of digital kinship is that we should get back the same autonomy and utility that from platforms that platforms have. And I was thinking especially about the post-Elon Musk closure of access to Twitter, for instance. So in the past, whenever there's an hashtag activism or something else going on, journalists and academics had access to something called the API, application programming interface. And so based on, you'd apply to Twitter, and Twitter gives you that, because it's your data on the platform, right? So Twitter was trying to create the illusion of data management tools. And so you had that access. You could scrape people from everywhere. You would do that. They would scrape. I mean, there was a problem also with scraping data, but you try to like supplement that by interviewing the activists directly themselves. And so you scrape the data and you're able to see who is driving the conversation, where the conversation is coming from, which communities are in conversation with each other. But post Elon Musk, that has been shut out. And so that illusion, I mean, Google would take your data, but then they will give you like the illusion of management tools and say, oh, you can manage your data. But now, right, with, you know, the bro culture, even the access, the utility, the autonomy that we had to the management of our data, even though it was always an illusion, but now they're taking it away outrightly and saying you should not have access to your data. And how I think on the question of data governance especially, and I really loved Irene's point about data sovereignty, and I feel like the people pulling us back are our governments. Our governments are the ones, like, we take 2 steps forward and the government just pulls us back. Basically, mostly because, especially because I'm Nigerian, mostly because the people there are largely incompetent. I was reflecting on the current Minister of Communications and something, and he had come with this grand plan for AI integration into Nigeria. That's Bosun Tijani. And you're talking about AI integration in Nigeria, and we don't even have kids with desks and tables, and you're talking about AI integration. Like, you have not even addressed the basic, you know, the basic issues with education and access, and you're talking about AI because you don't want to be left behind. How would they even, you know, use the tools? And it's just this, there's this, I am an acquaintance with Chinanza Okolo, and she worked on the Nigerian AI strategy and the African AI strategy. And so there's this surface level, approaches that the governments are taking so that they are not left behind. But then we're coming into this. I recently read a New York Times article where they used the term AI nationalism. And when I saw that thing, it gave me a headache, because I'm like, what is AI nationalism? And everybody is now scrambling so that you can consolidate your territory, because China and the USA, 2 empires, want to all consolidate their territory. And what's going to happen to like Nigeria and other African countries? You choose your empire. You're like, oh, which is the better evil? And it's just an insane cycle that we're stuck in. And I was thinking also of Dr. Wompini's point about cultural imperialism, and how the entire thing between Nara Smith and Oneswa revealed that African TikTokers don't get paid. And why? They draw the same amount of views. They get, like, there is absolutely no reason why African TikTokers should not be paid, while and they have to rely on ads and so on and so forth, while global creators in the global north get paid from TikTok itself, and also get revenue from ads. And it's like, yes, every day, all day. And I'm really this is like 18, but like I do some righteous 18 sometimes, and I'm like, I'm really glad that everybody has revealed the trad wife machinery that Nara Smith is. But yeah, does anybody else have any other questions?
There are some questions and reflections in the chat.
Okay. Let's see. Yes, we definitely need more feminists to get into the Web3 space. Thank you, Eunice, for that, and create more Afro-feminist DAOs. Yeah, we cannot expect platforms to authentically tell Black and African stories when their priority is profits. Absolutely. And some other thoughts about Nara Smith. Yeah. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? No? Okay, we can move on to the...
I think there was a question about the ethics of algorithm and who's writing it.
Oh, I must have missed that.
Yeah.
It's one of the earlier questions.
Okay. Okay, the ethics of algorithms and who is writing it mainly. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear and I couldn't see it.
So the question is the ethics of algorithms and who is writing it? Who is writing the algorithm mainly?
Thank you for, I'll take that. Thank you for such a profound question. It means then policy, we have a lot of work to do. We have put out research against some of these, and we found hugely that there are ethical considerations or ethical issues when it comes to writing algorithms, because when you think about design, the design of again, I like to use a lot of simulations. I hope you will follow and bear with me. You know, Chinese, what do you call your cutlery? Your Chinese glass. It's called a Chinese cup or a Chinese glass because it was designed by possibly a Chinese person with some Chinese artwork and Chinese culture in mind. So same case about algorithms that we're speaking about. The first or the communities who went into this work seeking to develop technologies such as AIs or artificial intelligence. One, we know in very many examples we're trying to, make our lives easier, of course, whether it's at the workplace, in the hospitals, in schools, but with the usage and uptake, of course, it commercialized. And when people enter into such fields, it takes a direction that gets personal, gets, individualized, personalized or individualized. And, profit making is also one of the key areas where many people also want to see, okay, so if I join the artificial intelligence, well, they'll make more money. Oh, okay. Let me see, let me invest, let me see how I can hire a few developers and see how they can build something fast, quick for me. And when you put in such investment, then the people who you've hired to develop this and the time frame you have also matters into the biases that go into some of those algorithms that you're speaking about that are seen in artificial intelligence and other technologies that we are seeing with a lot of bias. And you're wondering, who really made this thing? It's not speaking, it's not feeling like me, I don't know. And without really centering other communities outside Africa, we know that if our fiscal policies, I'm always back to the money and our government engagement, because the academia have written, Doc is teaching people every day about this. So I cannot even belabor the efforts and the good work that the academia, especially African teachers, have gone and to put into this work. Most of the gaps, most of the challenges, and some of the small wins we really want are seated in files in our government offices. It's your chief, it's your minister, it's your head of department somewhere in a village who was asked maybe, do you need internet cables in this village? People will access Wi-Fi for free. And they said, I'll get back to you later. So same case, decision making also plays a very huge role in biases. And that's why if our government had ready or were willing and there's political goodwill to advance Africa, we would have communities, especially from very wonderful schools that we have in Africa, developing our own artificial intelligence that are widely used, like what we all widely use. I'm not saying we don't have any, we do. Hey, heck, even my organization has 2 small LLMs just to show how languages are used to abuse women online. But with more resources, with more data access from African peoples, and that AI nationalism that Ololade is speaking about being broken to ensure that Africa is speaking as one, then more people will develop technologies that have more bias to Africans, which is also okay because we now need things that really serve us first, because we are giving and contributing and always giving your data, always putting out the energy and effort and time and knowledge. So it's time that we also have our own things that really serve us in the first place so that they can serve other people. Yeah. Sorry, I went over and over.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Irene. I just want to quickly add, since you gave us the macro, thank you, amazing. You know, of course, I always recommend Safia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression, which is a book about the way that algorithms are sort of oppressive of racially marginalized people, basically Black people in America. And I think I want to go back to my earlier point about the globality of, for example, colonialism, imperialism, racism, and say that the experiences that we have as Africans, especially in the use of AI, parallel the experiences of Black Americans in the US. And also just going directly to the micro of it or using examples. So of course, if you're thinking about the ethics of AI, I mean, African labor is what AI is built on. And that's why even the language models sort of mirror the way Africans speak. And that's why you gave the example of earlier about how a white scholar said that when he reads a paper and they use the words like delve, he just knows that it's AI. And, you know, delve is a very common word across various Anglophone countries on the continent. I mean, that's really how we speak. And so looking at, you know, that, you'll see that, of course, there's the exploitation of African labor with the production of AI tools. So the book is Algorithms of Oppression by Safia Umoja Noble. And so examples of how, you know, ethics, you know, the ethics of AI sort of manifest, or the non-ethics of AI manifest in like motion sensors. Have you ever gone into a washroom and tried to wash your hand with, you know, the ones that you put your hand underneath and then the water starts flowing? As a Black person, it will take a while sometimes before the water starts flowing because they use white skin to sort of test motion sensors. So I experienced it personally. Like, I'll go into a washroom in the US where white women will come into the washroom, wash their hands and leave, and I'll be like doing this dance with all the, you know, faucets in the bathroom. So that's an example of how AI is racist, and the experiences of, and African Americans in America experiences Africans experiences. So the next time you are in like one of those, and it doesn't matter where in the world, because they are the ones that produce it. So even in Africa, in Ghana, you will experience it because they did not make it for Black people, right? So that's an example. Another example is even in more dire situations, such as in medical equipment, where when they make medical equipment that tests for skin cancer, a lot of the times they use white skin to do that. And so it can take a while, or maybe they may even miss it altogether in Black skin. So there are so many. Yes, a very big example, Najwa, is at the airport. Like, I think it happens a lot at the airport with the motion sensor water faucet thing. So another example is like, you know, medical equipment, you know, medical equipment that will test for diseases like skin cancer and other things may not necessarily test well on Africans or Black people or darker skinned people, not necessarily Africans. It could also affect like South Asians, other people of darker, you know, more melanated people with more melanin than white people. So, you know, you may go into a medical place to, you know, a hospital to get tested for cancer. You and a white person goes and they test and they're like, oh, you have cancer or you don't have cancer. And then a Black person goes and it's like a whole other story altogether, or they don't even, you know, get to see what they get. And so these are some of the examples of the ways in which AI has shaped, you know, is racist, because fundamentally it is created by people who center their own lived experiences, like case in point, white people. And years ago, like 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you search for photos of a Black person, a monkey would pop up in the search box. So those are examples of the ways in which AI can be racist. And of course, if you read Safia's book, Algorithms of Oppression, where we look at how AI, which is seen as, you know, artificial intelligence, which is seen as science and therefore objective and not discriminatory, can be discriminatory towards specific types of people based on race or gender or whatever.
Thank you so much, Irene and Dr. Opini. I remember attending a talk where somebody had spoken about, it was Debbie Raji. Debbie Raji was at Emory and she was talking about algorithms that are discriminatory. And I walked into a bathroom with a white woman and I was struggling to get to wash my hands. And she came after me and she had this profound look like, oh my God, I'm complicit. And I walked out, and I walked out of the bathroom like, okay. But yeah, and I think this is a nice segue into the final point about like the digital colonialism of the African imaginary. And so beyond the physical extraction and beyond the bodily exploitation, we start to see how digital colonialism also operates at the level of the imagination and the identity. And it ties a lot to what Dr. Wumpini was just walking us through about algorithms of oppression and how they colonize not just what we do, but what we imagine is possible. And they create, and that's why I really love Sylvia Wynter's work about mono-humanism and how we can tie that onto like this techno hegemony we are seeing right now in this moment, where there's a single story of what it means to be human. And now that is encoded within algorithmic systems that fundamentally cannot ever comprehend what it means to be African. And so, for instance, when this what's it called, Midjourney, when Midjourney came out, I was trying to send some prompts to Midjourney, and the prompt was exactly, imagine a technologically advanced classroom in Nigeria as if you were a teacher in 2030. When I tell you the images that it brought out were images of children in earth, like in earth with mud, and they were looking very tattered. That image, that BBC typical image of children looking extremely tattered, and then the image was glossed over, so it kind of looked like advanced, but it was also not. You just basically slapped like image from its data of Africa, that those stereotypical images onto like technology. Exactly, poverty porn. And when I use the exact same prompt, imagine a technologically advanced classroom in the USA or in Britain as if you were a teacher in 2030, because I done the work for it, right? As if you were a teacher in 2030. And it was this beautifully technologically advanced that we have not even seen yet, classroom. And so even the imaginary, even art, like creating technological art, it's like, you can't even, this predictive systems are built on racist colonial imaginaries that would never replicate, what it means to be truly African, or what Africans can imagine their technological future could look like. And because we're also living in a space where, if you download an app, it will tell you, do you want this app to track your data so that we can use it to like determine, your like the kind of ads we show you and so on and so forth. And now algorithms are predicting our future actions based on our past actions. Now, humans are very dynamic. I could search for something now, and I don't need to search for it again in the next 10 years. But like, because of these predictive systems that AI is based on, largely because of data extraction, where we are creating fixed identities, where based on our past actions, we can evolve beyond algorithmic prediction. And they are forcing us to be legible to machines rather than the other way around. So they are containing us into a space where we live quantifiable 101010 lives that algorithms can interpret, and not the other way around, because they can interpret like And so in terms of, Omolara was talking to me like earlier about a conversation with Kauna, where they'll be looking at a cat on screen. And because the system says this is not a cat, and everybody just collectively agrees this is not a cat, because that's what the algorithm says. And so when you start to think of AI art generation, you start to think of captcha, even the captcha, that thing, are you a robot? And it's like, click on a bicycle. And you're like clicking on it, and it's like, and when you start to think of data labeling, so it's like we're getting contained into this structure that is forcing us to think, one in the Western way and one in the way that the algorithm determines. So I wanted to open the floor to our speakers to jump on that in whatever direction you want to take that. How technology is impacting how we can even imagine ourselves, our mental capacity as Africans.
I'll go. One, beautiful ladies, everyone on the call, we are doing amazing. Just to recognize that. Even when we are tired, even when we are feeling, what else is coming up our way? Recognize the efforts that we're doing at this point are building into the futures that we're talking about right now, digital futures. So when you talk about apps or tools like Midjourney, Otter, please allow me to use Otter, because it's a very simplistic example. We trust it so much, yet it's dividing us further. It doesn't get our accents. It doesn't get our mother tongue. If you're speaking Swahili, it'll even transcribe its own mambo jumbo. Yet, when you follow conversations from other companies like Google, they say they've released more languages online. So you wonder, isn't OTA training on these languages or on these data sets? You see there's a gap there. So understand you're doing amazing. And if you can contribute to public interest technologies, either through, publicly availing data sets, especially data sets that talk about wonderful things in Africa. How many roads have been constructed and are they functional? Are they beautiful? Do they have trees? All these contribute to some of those imageries that we expect to come out about us. Second thing I wanted to say, Liberation Alliance policy, our teachers like Dr. Wumpini, everything we speak about technologies and Africa, we continue to relay some of the challenges we are facing. We also have a very good opportunity, as Liberation Alliance is doing, to record or to paint the picture of the people who are making the effort, so that our efforts are not also not seen, or people are not saying later on that there was nothing we could do because there's no one talking about it. This is a very good opportunity and a very good step, because it makes sure that in the future people see that there are people who really want a technology that serves everyone, even beyond the books that we are all reading. So let's have more barazas or more conversations and consultations beyond our Zoom in our households, in our communities, so that it can really mainstream and can challenge everyone to even make better choices when using some of the technologies, make better choices when they're feeding the information into their apps. Thank you.
Dr., the floor is yours. Can you hear?
Sorry?
Oh, yeah. I was inviting you to talk about the imaginary, like the mental regarding technology.
Yeah, so I feel like one of the things that we didn't really get to talk much about was also like I want to talk about this was access and who has access to digital technologies, because very often we do talk about digital technologies with the assumption that a lot of us do have access to them. I mean, radio is still the most widely consumed medium across the continent. It's not even television, it's still radio. So it's important to put that within the context of media on the continent and who has access to these digital spaces. But I also think that as we construct access to digital spaces, we have to go beyond access via smartphones and to other forms of access through mobile telecommunications, right? So mobile telephony, which is an example that I gave earlier of, rural women using phones, which are not smart, to access healthcare in ways that they otherwise would not have access to. As far as imagining futures are concerned, I feel like there is a lot of potential for us to think about what our digital futures can look like, especially if we do so from African ways of being and knowing and seeing. And of course, we do have, again, I'm going to go back to some of the philosophies that we have on the continent that are useful for us to think about what these digital spaces mean. And so, African philosophies around humanity and solidarity and empathy are very important as we think about what digital media or digital technologies should be. And one of the biggest challenges or biggest problems in the digital space for us is, and why it is very dangerous on the continent, or is very dangerous for our use on the continent, is because it is conceptualized as a capitalist tool. It is digital technologies often are not conceptualized as tools for, I mean, of course they like to think that they are conceptualized as tool for social advancement or, people to use and to make their lives easier. but we have come to learn that it is for capitalist advancement or supporting the capitalist ends of the tech bros that Irene talked about. So these are some of the things that we need to think about. And also within the African continent, as we try and navigate what the digital space look like, and we try to imagine what it should be like for us in the future, we probably want to imagine digital spaces that don't leave people behind, or digital spaces that are not exclusionary of the most marginalized in our communities. And it's also important to imagine digital futures in ways that do not denigrate the perspectives of people who do not necessarily have access to these digital spaces. Because when we talk about access, very often we are talking about technological access, laptops, smartphones, internet data, but we are not thinking about access as far as language is concerned. And when I say language, I mean globally and also continentally. So globally, the language of technology is English. So there's the Anglo dominance in conversations around technologies. Even computer, the word computer, if you translate it to other European languages like Spanish, computadora, it's still drawn from English. So like the Anglo dominance in these spaces and what that means for colonization within those contexts. And intracontinentally too, when we look at language dominance, the exclusion of African languages. So I do a lot of work around African language media, and I'm very passionate about what that looks like within the digital space. So Ngugi wa Thiong'o has this concept he calls linguifam, and linguifam basically means the starvation of languages of growth. So if you're starving a language of growth, it means that it is not being developed in the digital space. The users of the language are not using it in digital spaces. And when I say that, I'm talking specifically of African languages like Pular and Daganli and Igala and all of these other languages across the continent. So they are not growing within the digital space. So if they are not growing within the digital space, they are being starved, and linguifam is happening. And as they are starved on those spaces, of course, we're seeing language death, the death of these languages in the digital spaces. But there is some hope. And the hope also comes with caveats. So there is some hope because in my context here in Ghana, we're seeing more and more indigenous language media pop up within the context of satellite television, radios, and all of that. But a lot of these, specifically with the satellite television platform, are beholden to Western owners of these infrastructures. So for example, to run a satellite television station in Ghana, you may have to pay as much as $7,000 a month in order to stay on air when you're not even making that much revenue. So again, we're seeing digital colonization within that context. So for me, imagining a liberatory digital future on the continent means that we work collectively as a continent and not individual countries to support what we want to see as far as regulation is concerned. So, for example, South Africa does a good job, and going back to the Netflix example, of holding Netflix accountable as far as content is concerned. So South Africa, the policy in South Africa is sort of similar to the EU policy, where they require a certain percentage of media that Netflix broadcasts within the South African context to originate in South Africa. And that's why we have a lot of South African content on Netflix, because they literally have a law on that. And I think it would be good if the AU could grow some fangs and begin to advocate for the continent collectively rather than individually, much like Irene said earlier, the EU does. So so for me, liberatory digital futures mean that we work collectively as a continent, go back and revisit Pan-Africanism, go back and pull from the values of Nkrumah and the vision that he had for the continent on Ghana as far as media for social development, media for anti-imperialist ends are concerned, to support us collectively as a continent. And of course, in order to do that, we also have to think about the ways in which the continent is tied to Europe. Specifically, I'm thinking about Francophone Africa and how Francophone Africa is basically fettered to France as far as, these silly and exploitative monetary policies are. So there's so much that we need to do. And I'm just going to close by saying that in doing this, we need to move away from using the West as a yardstick to measure progress or development or digital advancements in Africa, and look to Africa as a continent and Africa as a valid space where we can, support our own development. We're already doing it in various ways with the examples that I gave of M-Pesa, which is not happening in other parts of the world, but happens within the African continent because of the socio-political and economic landscape that we have here. Yes.
Thank you so much. I see some hands open up. I wanted to actually throw the question to like the audience. So please, Gabrielle and Nimisere, please feel free to go on. Nimisere, do you want to go first since Gabrielle spoke earlier?
Yeah, thank you and well done. My question is for Uminipi. I hope I pronounced her name right.
Wumpini.
Umpini. All right, I'm sorry about that. And it's about the African Union and even state government regulating these policies. I am a little bit skeptical about that, considering our governments, like the government of Nigeria, have tried to use I think hate speech. They tried to use the hate speech in the past to regulate what the media, especially journalists, can say online, and use social media abuse to stifle people from speaking out. So how do we work around that? I don't know how to really ask, but like it's like a slippery slope for me, really. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. It also makes them bring in their authoritarian influence, yeah, as well, to keep feminist, stifle feminist voices to online. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Can we have all the questions and then our speakers can answer? So Gabrielle, do you want to go, and then Alexander next?
Sure. So my question kind of is, my research interests are around like Pan-African feminism and transnational Black feminist frameworks. So I wanted to get some insight on how digital technology can be a tool for Pan-African feminist solidarity, and how how it can kind of be, I guess, I think it's already happening, but how it can continue being like the next rendition of like kind of the Pan-African movement, but with like an explicitly like feminist, Black feminist, and African feminist approach.
Thank you. Alexander and then Ivy.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much. Like, this conversation is incredibly necessary, and I wish more people, I just wish everybody needs to hear this. But I joined the call a little late, and I think you all were talking a little bit, you mentioned like the art scene in Africa a little before, but my thesis is about looking at biennales and triennials, art triennials and exhibitions like on the continent. And so I was wondering, like, how do you think technology impacts local art infrastructures in various countries, or like continentally as well?
Ivy, please. Thank you, Alexander. Ivy, please.
Thank you so much. First, I've had such a enriching experience listening to all of our speakers. I have like a thought and then a question related to it. The thought first is that as a feminist, I often I used to be in the space where I'm like, okay, we must make change happen. And I think I've shifted to a place where I think we must identify where the wave is going and then direct it as we see. And I think that takes a little bit less of the draining energy that the former takes. And so I'm really curious about youth, and the fact that the continent is very, very young, and will be the only space in the world where youth is a big part of our future for the next 25 years, 45 years. We're really looking at Africa as the home of young people. And I think it's really, really interesting then to ask questions about what it means when the continent is young, but everywhere else in the world is really old, whether we go back to this very colonial structure that we were talking about in the beginning, where it's just shipping away young people to wherever they'll be taken, or can we do something more interesting with that? And I really think the internet kind of feels like the place that will drive that in interesting ways, as more young people are online, more young people are on TikTok, organizing. In Kenya, for example, a big part of the organizing was online. And so I'm really curious how our panelists, particularly Irene, are thinking about this place where young people and technology are meeting and what that means for the continent in the next few years.
Okay, Dr. Irene and Wumpini. So the question from Nimisuri was directed to Dr. Wumpini, and then the last question was directed directly to Irene. And then there was a question about the local arts infrastructure. I don't know who wants to take that. And the question about digital technology for Pan-African feminist solidarity. So feel free to jump in. We're running out of time.
Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly talk about the first question. So one of the biggest problems for imagining liberatory digital futures globally is that the people who can regulate or who have the power to make laws around these issues are not digital natives. Like, they don't even know what
Oh no, the network caught up with us. No.
I'm thinking back to when Mark Zuckerberg was brought to, I don't know, the Senate, Congress, whatever, and then yeah, sorry, my internet is a little unstable, so just bear with me. And so, yeah, one of the reasons why we might have challenges will be because the people who do work within this context, or who have the power to regulate or enact laws around the digital world, are people who don't even use digital spaces in the ways that you expect them to use them. So that is one of the problems. And I feel like with the question of Nigeria, where, and it's not just Nigeria, there are so many countries where leadership will weaponize access to digital spaces to silence dissent and all of that. I think that, one of the things that we could think about is the role of independent bodies in, regulating these spaces. So, for example, in Ghana, and this is not even a digital example, this is an example of like our traditional media. So in Ghana, the president of Ghana cannot appoint the director of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. There is a body that appoints the director of the GBC. So the president of Ghana cannot ask the GBC director why they are not reporting favorably about his government, because he doesn't have authority over him in that way. So there's an independent body which constitutes a number of board members from across various areas who do these kinds of work. So I think that in our internet governance on the continent, these are some of the things that we need to think about in ways that will ensure that there's transparency, there's accountability, and that there is an abuse of power where, Buhari decides to shut down Twitter, or, Muhammad decides to shut down Facebook or whatever. So we don't have to deal with those specific issues. And I think that having a robust civil society, even if you have a corrupt government, can also go a long way. So I'm thinking about the Ghana example where and when you said, Irene, that you do like tech and elections, I'm like, you should come to Ghana right now and let's do something, because we are like a few days away from our elections. I think literally 10 days away from our national elections. And so if you look at these sorts of space, so if you're thinking about tech governance or internet governance, we have to think about the robust society. So the example that I was going to give was that our electoral commission said that they were going to approve specific media organizations to monitor the elections, at the various polling stations, and then the civil society were up in arms. Like, this was literally, I think they made the announcement yesterday or 2 days ago, when there was pushback from from the civil society. Then the electoral commission began to backtrack, and they're like, okay, we're going to have a dialogue, and then we're going to figure out how we're going to do this so that people have access to be able to monitor that the elections are free and fair. So I think that having a robust civil society can also be helpful. A civil society that is not in bed with the government is very important, because if they're in bed with the government, it doesn't bode well for thinking hopefully about the future. And I'm just going to go quickly to the second question about digital technologies as a Pan-African tool of feminist solidarity. And I'll say that this is already happening. This space is an example of that happening, right? So this is a space of people. I can say that in this space, there's very few people that I've actually met face-to-face before, many of whom I've met virtually and have connected with virtually, and have learned from virtually. So there are various examples of the ways in which Pan-African feminists have used digital spaces to support the work that they do. And our book, African Women in Digital Spaces, was born out of a Pan-African feminist ethic of connecting African feminist scholars across the world, like Europe, North America, Africa, even Asia, to come together to talk about their experiences using these digital spaces. And an example is NSAS. When Nigerians, embarked on the NSAS demonstration, there were Nigerian diasporic feminists based in the US who would organize like Twitter spaces or Zoom meetings to provide, to have a conversation about sharing strategies that worked for them in their fight against police brutality within the American space. So using these spaces as spaces of political education, and also as spaces of, political strategizing and how to deal with government repression. So that's an example of how that has happened. And we've also seen that happening in African feminist scholars learning from one another within the continent, learning strategies from what I personally have learned a lot to resist repression within their countries, and I feel like others have too. So digital spaces, for example, like Twitter, via Twitter Spaces, is a space that many African feminists, Pan-African feminist organizers have used as spaces of political education, where they've invited various experts to talk on various topics so that people can learn to be engaged politically.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so we apologize, but then I'll invite Irene to please answer the questions, and for the audience to please bear with us. Yeah.
So everyone on the call, especially my dear Africans, I believe most of us are skeptical of the African Union. And I keep asking myself, so if they don't do it, who will do it for us? Because their mandate is to advocate for African peoples and put measures in place to protect African peoples. They flopped on various aspects. If this is the one thing they get right and we work with them to get it right, policy and other organizations that we work in data and technology have said, we have to work with them because they have power and they're connected and they engage with some of these big companies, big tech companies, and the private sector. So it's about time that we also, again, I'm always pro use what's available to you. We use what's available to us and find ways to decolonize and deconstruct while you're inside there. I can give you a very simple example. The Pan-African Parliament, which is housed under the African Union, have a very robust women's rights caucus. It's not well known for many of us, but actually when you speak to them and when we engage them, they get to hear you, they get to influence in their own way, up to national level, from Pan-African level up to national level. Remember, they sit in different committees in their parliaments. They also sit in the African Union level. They also have their own committees. So these are some of the areas we've found ourselves having to influence. And we also realized all these tech companies, when they come to Africa, they meet these same people. So we can be skeptical, but these are the people who hold some of the information and power against us. Let's find ways in which we can engage with them in a way to also benefit. The other question I had was on the last speaker. Because of my internet, I had a bit of lapse. I had them speaking about, can feminists engage in a way, to dismantle the process? And I always ask and put myself to a challenge of, when it comes to engaging this sector about data ownership, digital kinship, we also need to consider the issue of resources. And what does resources avail to us? Resources avail to us power. So at the end of it all, the conversations on economic justice, well-being, taking care of yourself, being able to work or being able to engage in an opportunity that can advance you money so that you can be able to own and afford technologies or own and afford companies that can afford a technology company is where we need to be putting more pressure. So those of us who are working in the sector to influence fiscal policy changes that advance women's ability to engage as equal players, as people who also contribute vastly to the revenues of our country, we also have a very huge role to look at how ownership of digital technologies by Africans can play a huge role in increasing our own revenues in our countries. I've just been reading something that was published by MasterCard about gig work, and the angle always takes that Africa is providing labor. I'm waiting to read reports that will speak about Africa also providing work, or Africa also owning these companies that's giving work and opportunities to Africa. So that we're not always talking about on the conveyor belt, we're always the ones who have no power. So that's the other point of deconstructing from a feminist perspective, which you can also look to explore, that is really underexplored. And that's why when I was introducing myself, I was saying simply, Africans, we also need to develop our own big social media companies rather, so that we don't have to rely on the ones that we know that are trending. Ours can also pick up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been so insightful. This has been like 2 hours went by so fast. And I am so thankful for the opportunity to moderate this session. I'll end by this quote that I sent a message to Omolara. I was like, can I put this on my Twitter header? And it was on Liberation Alliance, our Instagram page. And it said, we cannot approach the world as though our role is simply to adapt. And I think it's so profound, especially in the context of digitality and digital colonialism. And our speakers have offered us ways to move forward in this moment in time, about making better choices, about critical consciousness through spaces like this, about sticking to the ideas of Pan-Africanism, about being anti-colonial and anti-imperial in our thoughts, and about being intentional and pushing for indigenous language and indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing. So this has been really insightful, and I'm so thankful for this opportunity. I'm going to hand over to Omolara now.
Thank you so much. I love feminists. That's all I can say. Obsessed with feminists. I have heard Dr. Wampini speak, a few times, and every time I'm just like, oh God, this woman. I have heard Irene, I have heard Ololade, and I'm so grateful that we get to be in community with you. It has been such a beautiful conversation because one of the key things that we are passionate about in Liberation Alliance is to nurture anti-imperialist politics and solidarity. And that means that we also need to ask critical questions of structures that we consider normal, of our own desires, of consumerism, for example. The question of working with the government when we are dealing with people who are thoroughly colonized and are obsessed with the notions, the capitalist notions of power and influence, and that controls our realities. But when we are critically aware of the fact that, going back to the quote that Ololade read, of the fact that we cannot live as though our role is to just merely adapt, it just brings us into a space of imagination, especially regarding, African feminist thought, African imaginaries, our ways of being, our ways of knowing. And so I want to encourage everybody as we live here, please don't let the energy drop. Let's keep learning. Let's keep, keeping ourselves in that space where we are woke. I was talking to Lola Dale and I was like, for lack of better word, we have to stay woke because, the way the world is arranged especially as African women, we have to stay in that space where we are not just kind of pawns in a system that desires to use us as a site of exploitation. and deny us our humanity. I just want to thank all our speakers. I want to thank Ololade, particularly because, I love a queen who, I really enjoyed your moderation. I love the direction that you took us in. I want to thank Dr. Wumpini. I love everything you say. I don't even care if you're just whistling. I'm there. I love I love Irene and the work that policy does, because policy takes us, for example, spaces like Liberation Alliance, we do the critical awareness work, but policy takes us further into building infrastructures so that when we need to pivot from capitalist exploitative structures, we have an alternative. And that is so beautiful because, we always talk about moving away from critique into building new worlds. And, anti-imperialist solidarity is so important in the building of new worlds because of the macroeconomics reality of the world. It is deeply unequal. It is set there to perpetuate colonial legacies of violence and exploitation. And so we need to, kind of move in ways that creates infrastructures like policy does, but also that problematizes and gets to the deep, deep parts of the things, basically saying the quiet parts aloud. And that is what we do at Liberation Alliance. We just say the quiet parts aloud and we look crazy for like 5 minutes, but then it gets kind of better. And we really love that. So I really want to thank everyone who has joined us today. I can't believe that we still have so many people on the call. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. And I would like to finally say that if you would love to moderate or speak at, during the series of We Speak of New Things, we want to hear from you. We want your knowledge. We want you to stay in community with us. So if you want to share with us, we still have, I think, 3 more parts of this work that will happen in the first and second quarter of next year. Please write to us so that we can bring you on board. We can share the knowledge together. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Big love to African feminists and our sisters in other parts of the global South. Our sisters and MBs and Nibblings and all the other people, in the global South. And we thank you so much for joining us. We will end the conversation here for the day. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, I'm Olara. Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to say that I put in the chat to stay connected with us and engage with all our resources. We are on all social media, but particularly just wanted to mention one of our new resources, the Library of Perspectives, where we are archiving African women's knowledge, history, and experiences. This is just a soft launch, so we invite you to engage with the library and our anthology also, The Makings of Revolutionary Hope, which is an important documentation of our dreams and imaginations of a liberated Africa. Thank you, everyone. Again, the links are in the chat.
Thank you so much, Toby. And that is Toby, the co-dreamer of Liberation Alliance Africa. She's been quiet today, but I guess it's cold in Canada. And so, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Please click on the links, especially the library. All the links are important, but we want to hear what you think about the library. We are kind of, archiving oral knowledge of African women and feminists and non-binary folks who are walking the liberatory journey so that other people can see themselves in these stories and kind of be inspired to live boldly and beautifully. So thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate you. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much. I look forward to more.
Yes, please stay connected with us. We are always thinking, we're always opening spaces for community and all of that good stuff. Bye.